Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape for folks who know the teams best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to Conference USA to take a look at the Western Kentucky Hilltoppers, who finished 8-6 last season, and they capped off their season with an appearance in the Boca Raton Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with a red and white spring showcase on April 12th. We have a special guest joining us today. He is a co-host for the number one podcast for WKU Athletics. The podcast is Topper Talk. Topper Talk is the official podcast of the Red Towel Trust Collective. He is Stephen Moffett. Stephen and Topper Talk can be found on X at Topper_Talk. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Hey guys, appreciate y'all for having me. Glad to be here.
We're glad to have you here represent WKU, and for those who are just tuning into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been covering Western Kentucky football?
Yeah, so again, my name's Stephen Moffett. I'm a co-host of the Topper Talk podcast. We've been doing the Topper Talk podcast now for going on our fourth season as this football season is kicking off. I have been covering WKU in podcast format since about 2017. I was previously on a podcast with some buddies highlighting the WKU and Marshall rivalry called the Moonshine Throwdown. But once conference realignment hit us in 2021 and Marshall went to the Sun Belt Conference, they spun off and did their own podcast called the Thundercast, who I know are friends of this podcast and good friends of mine, Katie and Russ over there. And we decided over here that, WKU also needed another talking head for, our athletics, our athletes, our coaches and programs. So we started Topper Talk, and, it's obviously been a lot of fun just covering our programs. It's, we cover it year round. We don't take a break. It's, every week we're putting out an episode. We cover every single athlete, every single program. It's just been a lot of fun.
Well, let's move over to some Hilltoppers football, and they'll have a new offensive coordinator here in 2025 as Coach Helton has brought in Rick Bowie. Coach Bowie comes to Western Kentucky from Abilene Christian, where he served as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach in 2024. In 2022 and 2023, Bowie served as the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach at Valdosta State. From what you've been able to see and hear, can you describe the offensive style we should plan to see for the Hilltoppers in 2025?
Yeah, I think that what Coach Bowie is going to bring to this offense and what Coach Helton is known for is kind of an up-tempo, not exactly an air raid, but more of like a pro raid type of an offense. We're going to lean heavily on the pass. When you have a guy like Maverick McIver who knows the offensive system that Coach Bowie is going to install, you're not going to stray far from that. And then I think what I've heard and seen out of spring and then into fall practices now is basically it's just been a meshing of minds. What Coach Bowie and Maverick like to do, what they see on the field, maybe some new concepts and new wrinkles, and then obviously what Coach Helton has done going on to his seventh season now has been known for spreading the ball out, putting guys in position to catch the ball either in space to make plays or with one-on-one matchups where they can go win a battle. And create big yards. So I don't expect that to change. We're going to be up tempo. We're going to be more pass heavy, probably 2-1, 70% to 30% run. More than likely, I don't think we'll stray far from that, but I think we're going to be at up tempo, move the ball down the field, and want to score, 30 plus points a game, because that's where we've seen the most success with Coach Helton in this conference and trying to get to a conference title.
Well, Moff, let's get to the position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. This room's going to look very different in 2025, as every quarterback who took a snap for the Hilltoppers in 2024 hit the portal. But as you mentioned there, the staff brought in Maverick McIver from Abilene Christian following OC Rick Bowie. And after the spring, they brought in Caleb Mickle from Houston. How did the quarterback room look in the spring?
It was basically the Maverick show. That's kind of the expectation, is he's going to be, quarterback one unless something happens. Unfortunately, something happened last year. We had quarterback one go down in the third game of the season, and we had to lean heavily on quarterback two and Caden Veltkamp to finish the season. Obviously, it's going to look a lot different this year. Like you said, both of those guys transferred out, brought in Maverick McIver. He is a gunslinger. He's a seventh-year quarterback. He's really smart between the ears. That's not something that you can take away from him. He's played a lot of football. The coaches have consistently called him an extension of the coaches on the field. So that's just, you can't replace that. And when we've seen that in the past, when we had a Bailey Zappi and a Zach Kitley matchup, pairing, on the field, is when we saw some of our best football and some of our best results. So I think we can have a really special season, and I know that there's a lot of talent around him, but the film that I've got to watch and what I've seen in person is that Maverick he's a gunslinger. He stands in there, he reads the field well, he throws a good catchable ball, he's very accurate. And he's also not afraid to take a hit, man. If you go back and watch that game versus Texas Tech last year, he almost led them to an upset victory. He was standing in the pocket till the very last second, taking some hits, at times throwing off his back foot, which usually isn't advised, but man, he was getting them into windows where only his wide receivers could catch him and make plays. So he is a tough quarterback, and I'm looking forward to seeing him, week 0 in just a few weeks from now.
Well, last year you kind of talked about how you had your quarterback one, and then you needed to rely on Caden to come in game 3 or 4 was of the season. What does the backup quarterback position look like after Maverick?
I don't know a lot about Caleb McMickle that you talked about transferring in from Houston. I don't believe he's had any game experience. The same can be said for Tucker Parks and Rodney Tisdale. I've gotten to see them in spring ball the last 2 years. I would assume that trio is one of those 3 is going to have to emerge as quarterback 2. I would say that Tucker and Rodney probably have the leg up. They've been in the system a little longer. And what those 2 guys bring to the field, what I've seen out of them in spring, especially this last year, is they're a lot more mobile than quarterbacks we've had in the past. When we had Austin Reed, he could run the ball, but it was more of just he was more of a north and south straight, hit an A gap and run. Same with Caden Veltkamp last year. He wasn't bouncing outside trying to make anybody miss. When you watch those guys in spring, they can roll out, make somebody miss, pull the ball down and take off with a little speed. So those guys have a threat that they'll bring a new dimension to the game and to the offense if for some reason they are forced into action, whether it be by injury or if we're just hopefully blowing somebody out and we throw quarterback 2 in. I think, both of those guys could come in and hopefully not skip a beat with this offense.
Well, let's move over to the running backs. And Elijah Young was their bell cow back in 2024. He had 200 attempts for 891 yards and 3 touchdowns. He has graduated while LT Sanders has hit the portal. This room is highlighted by the return of George Hart III and Jalen Hampton. That duo combined for 266 yards rushing in 2024. The staff also added Lavelle Wright from Austin Peay, and after the spring, they added Jaden McGill from Tennessee State. There's plenty of opportunity in this room, Stephen. How did this group look in the spring, and what are your expectations heading into fall camp?
Well, I really like this room. It's an underutilized and an underappreciated aspect of this offense. But I really like George Hart, man. He is a football player. His dad's a football coach. He's just a really smart player. He can catch the ball out of the backfield, and then when he catches the ball, he can go make a play. You mentioned Lavelle Wright. We added him from Austin P, and he previously had played at UK. They held him out in spring. He had a minor injury that they were just wanted him to get better. He's back in fall ball now, but everything I've heard about that kid is he is an absolute home run hitter. If he gets the ball in his hands, it can go to the house at any time. And then Jalen Hampton's kind of that bigger back that can just bruise and run over somebody. But George Hart is the guy that I have the most expectations from, more because he's a known entity returning. But I think there's also other guys that are going to contribute as well.
As I mentioned earlier, in 2024, the staff really kind of seemed to, lean on Elijah Young. What are your expectations in 2025? Are they going to lean on one guy, or is it going to be much more, of a committee approach?
Helton typically is going to rotate several guys through. It's typically going to be, anywhere from 2 to 4 guys that are getting touches. And usually that's going to be, a series at a time. It's not typically, rotating multiple backs on a series. But I would expect that George and Lavelle are probably going to get the majority of the snaps between those two. And then the other guys are going to fill in, whether it's situational or just riding a hot hand, a series here and there. I don't think there's going to be a bell cow that's getting 75% of the carries and then the other guys are getting 25. I think it's going to be those two and Lavelle and George that are getting, 60 to 70% of the carries. And then the other guys, just depending on, game flow, who's got the hot hand, or hopefully not injuries. I always want to knock on wood and say, hopefully not injuries to forcing other guys onto the field. But I think those two guys will be, kind of a tandem bell cow, if you want to look at them like that.
Well, this room kind of looks, I'm interested in this room because it has seniors, redshirt seniors, graduates, and then a bunch of young guys. If we want to look into the future, there's one guy maybe that's on the younger side that kind of gets some run towards the end of the season, or might be the main guy in 2026. Who would that be?
I've heard good things about Donovan Jones, and I've heard good things about Marvis Parrish. Now that we're going into fall ball, haven't got to lay my eyes on them yet. I'm actually planning on going to fall practice tomorrow as we're recording. So hoping to get my eyes on some more of those guys and put a face with the jersey number and kind of see them in live action. But I think there's definitely several players, younger players that, maybe they're not going to get a ton of time this year, or maybe if they do it special teams or they redshirt, whatever that is. But I think if they stick it out, let a couple of these older guys have their year this year and then come into next year, a year stronger, a year smarter, a year better, that they can definitely contribute moving forward.
Well, let's move on over to the wide receivers. The Hilltoppers, leading wideout from 2024, Keyshawn Johnson, has graduated along with his 76 receptions on 105 targets for 931 yards and 7 touchdowns. This room also graduated Dalvin Smith and Michael Matheson. While we saw the likes of Easton Messer and a few others transfer, the Hilltoppers are going to look to replace 280 targets, 2,429 yards, and 17 touchdowns. That sounds a lot of opportunity for a lot of guys that in this room in 2025. Did MacGyver seem to target anyone early and often in camp or the red and white game?
Yeah, so one guy that really stood out to me was Cameron Flowers in the spring game. He got targeted quite a bit. Matt Henry, it was odd to see Matt Henry out there because he's number 17, and that's the number that Dalvin Smith wore here for 6 years. So it was weird to see somebody else representing that. Then Katie Hutchinson, he's a known entity. I mean, he's just been a heck of a player for a couple years for us now. Then I saw him in an after practice interview yesterday, and he is bulked up. He is huge. He kind of had this Malachi Corley look. If you remember what he looked like without pads on, man, he's a big boy. Then you also got Musa Berry, who's also a returning player, knows the offense, has been spending a lot of time with Maverick, just trying to develop that rapport going forward. We did graduate a lot and had some guys transfer out. But luckily, I think the wide receiver room is always one of the deepest position groups in this offense, year in and year out. And I think it kind of naturally recruits talent itself. If I'm an offensive coach or a wide receiver coach, offensive coordinator, and I'm out visiting or talking to prospects, it's pretty easy to sell, in my opinion, to come to Western Kentucky. I can show you past results. I can show you how much we throw the ball, yards that we gain. We're not going to limit it to 1, 2, 3 receivers. We're going to be spreading that thing out to 7 or 8 guys. So you just have to come here and battle and get a chance to get on the field and make some plays, catch the ball, and it kind of recruits itself. I've said that about our offense, and this room is still going to be just as deep as ever, even though there's some names that are unknown right now to the Hilltopper fan base. Several guys on this list are going to jump off the page and have great seasons for us.
Well, Moffett talked about how they spread the ball out 6, 7. When you look at the wide receiver 1 versus wide receiver 2, it's just like you talk about. Wide receiver 1 averages 133 targets in the season, while the wide receiver 2 averages 97 targets in the season. That's averages. So I mean, that's like you said, it sells itself. I expect we're going to see fireworks for Western Kentucky, again in 2025. What are your expectations for this wide receiver room in 2025?
I think it's going to be hard to not lean on Matthew Henry to be that lead receiver. He was an FCS All-American last year, 1,200 receiving yards. I want to say he's 6'2", 6'3", so he's got that prototypical size and speed of a wide receiver. Probably not as physical as a Keyshawn Johnson that came in last year from Alabama State and really had an awesome season and is now making a heck of an impression in NFL camps with the Browns. But I think he's going to be that wide receiver 1 that's going to help us move the ball down the field. Then you've got a couple guys in Katie Hutchison and Jarius Mack that are going to help us move the chains. Musa Berry is going to help us move the chains. Cameron Flowers. And then even moving down, looking at some of the younger guys, Dylan Vickerson, a freshman, Fonzie Smith. If those guys can find time to get on the field and make a play, I think we have so much talent from, graduate seniors, redshirt juniors, and then even these younger guys that can come in and make an immediate impact. I mean, this is going to be the strongest position group on the field for us with the most talent. And that's not by accident. That's by design with the talent that we want to bring in and what we want to do and how we want to run this offense.
With the offensive coaching change, what have you been able to learn in terms of how the tight ends will be utilized in this offense?
The tight ends are, again, one of those kind of underutilized positions in this offense. But I think historically, when we've used them, over the middle of the field, it only helps the running game. It only helps those throws to the outside. Those safeties and linebackers have to be aware of that middle of the field option. Noah Myers is the returning tight end. He's the known entity. He had to step in last year when we had an injury to River Helms. River Helms ended up transferring. So he's the guy that we know kind of what we get with him. He's a big body. He can catch the ball. He can make a play after it. We brought in a couple other guys in Jackson West and Justin Wolf that have played at some bigger programs, but they didn't get a lot of opportunity to get on the field and catch balls and make plays. Same can be said with some of the wide receiver guys that are coming in. They came from offenses that don't spread the ball around a ton. I think any one of those guys, mainly Noah Myers, he's going to be one we lean on. But I think any of those guys are going to be able to go out and catch passes in this offense because typically they're not getting covered. There's not bracket coverage on our tight end going across the middle. He's usually going to be in a one-on-one matchup, and he just has to get in space and win that matchup.
Well, Moff, we're talking about passing the ball. Well, you got to have somebody to block you so you can throw that ball. I'm a little bit nervous about the offensive line heading into 2025. The Hilltoppers are going to look to replace their entire line, with the exception of right tackle Marshall Jackson. On top of that, they lost a lot of depth too. As you can imagine, the staff brought in several transfers to help supplement those losses. But what are your expectations for this room in 2025?
Yeah, this has been one of the bigger question marks of the offseason. It's been one that I've seen other Hilltopper fans, openly discussing. Like, man, I'm worried about the offensive line. Everybody left except for Marshall, whether it was graduation or whether it was transfer, whatever it was. And then we brought in a lot of pieces that, maybe the names of where they come from don't blow you off the page. When they're coming from MAC schools, et cetera. But the way I look at it is, one, our offensive line coach, Joe Bernardi, has done a fantastic job entering his third season. He has done a really good job at identifying talent. getting them on the field, getting the right pieces together, and then coaching them up to be successful, helping keeping our quarterback clean, letting the running backs have good holes to run and letting pass plays develop. And in our offensive system, it's so much tempo, it's so much get the ball in your hand quick that you don't need these offensive lines, consistently holding the ball or holding blocks for long developing plays. Now, occasionally, obviously, you want to take a shot downfield and that needs to happen, but it's not like they're getting beat up and holding blocks for extended amount of periods every single play on the field. So I really have a lot of faith and trust in our coaching staff, especially Joe Bernardi and some of the guys that he brought in. Now we're just getting to the point in fall ball where we have to figure out who's the 5 best guys and get them on the field to help keep Maverick clean so he can lead this offense.
Well, Moff, let's say this line dominates in 2025. Their success is due in large part to whom on this line?
I mean, it's Marshall Jackson for sure. He's the vocal leader of this room. He's the returner of this room. I mean, he knows what the expectations are. He's going to make sure everybody knows what the call is and has the right mentality heading into every single drive, every single play. He is the leader of that room, and that's not in question in any way, shape, or form.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
Well, I'm going to go away from the quarterback. I'm not going to give it to Maverick, even though that's the obvious pick. I think that's the guy that's going to get the awards and the accolades and all the shine because he's going to throw for 4,000 or 5,000 yards and 40 plus touchdowns. We hope, but I think the guy that's going to complement his skill set is going to be Matthew Henry at the wide receiver position. I think he's in line to get the lion's share. That wide receiver 100 plus targets. He just has to go out and catch the ball and make plays. And in this offense, if you can do that, you're going to be really successful. And, Coach Helton has said it several times, one good year can change your life. And that's either as a skill position in this offense, you can propel yourself to a pro career, whether that's NFL or somewhere else, just by coming here and having one good year. And I think that can be Matthew Henry for sure.
Well, let's move on over to the defensive side of the ball, and we have a duo of coaches to talk about here. Coach Helton's hired Devon Brown and David Merritt to be the co-defensive coordinators. Coach Brown was the DB's coach for WKU in 2024 and 2023, but prior to Western Kentucky, he was at Ole Miss, where he served as a defensive analyst in 2022 and a grad assistant in 2021. Coach Merritt was also promoted as he served as inside linebacker coach in 2023 and 2024. And before Western Kentucky, Coach Merritt was at Georgia, where he served as a defensive quality control coordinator for 2 seasons. I mean, they've been around the defense, but Moff, can you describe the defensive scheme that they plan to run there at WKU?
Yeah, so I'm fairly certain that we're going to remain in that 3-3-5 base set is what we're going to operate out of. Sometimes that kind of looks like a 4-2 where we'll have a hybrid guy that's also up on the line as well. But we're not going to stray from that, at least not in year one, even with these new co-defensive coordinators getting promoted. But I really am excited and looking forward to those guys getting a chance to lead the defense. I think that's been an underrated staple of Coach Helton's tenure here, as he's not only very good at identifying talent in the transfer portal and getting them to come and play at Western Kentucky, he's also really good at identifying young up-and-coming coaches and getting them onto his staff. And even if they're only here 2, 3, 4 years, whatever that may look like, getting the most out of them and making sure they're successful while they are here before they move on to a bigger and better job if it's at P4 or wherever. And I think Coach Devon Brown and Coach Davis Merritt are kind of those next young guys that he's going to help groom to be successful in their coaching careers. They're both still young and new into coaching. I really think that's an underrated aspect of what Coach Helton brings to his program leadership and management, is just identifying talent across the board, not just players, but coaches as well.
Well, let's move over to these position groups, and we'll start up front with the defensive line. This unit will look totally different as the Hilltoppers will look to replace their entire defensive line, or their starting defensive line anyway, in 2025. No loss is bigger than first-team all-conference defensive tackle Hosea Wheeler. Wheeler was a menace on the interior with 55 tackles, 9 pressures, and 2 sacks in 2024. Stephen, what are the expectations for this defensive line heading into 2025?
Yeah, it's tough. Like you said, we've lost several guys. The biggest one being Hosea Wheeler. He went on to Indiana. We're in that transfer portal and that NIL era where, there's P4 schools throwing, $250,000 checks at guys that can't turn that down. And it's tough, and it leads to a lot of attrition in our roster. Every single position group we're talking about just turnover, and it's not only all graduating, it's transfer portal as well. But the way I look at it is, Coach Helton has always embraced the transfer portal even before it came what it is today. Going back to 2019 and 20, his first couple of years on the Hill, he was always replenishing talent from the transfer portal. Guys looking for a new home, looking for somewhere to come and shine. Um, and I think that's no different with the defensive line. It is a question mark. It's probably one of the bigger question marks along with the offensive line. Both sides of the ball are pretty much turned over completely new faces. But I have a lot of faith in the staff that we have to identify talent, and we have a ton of depth with the bodies that we brought in. So I'm excited for it. I know it's going to look new. It's going to be, faces and numbers that our fans aren't familiar with, but I think we've got some guys that are going to make an impact this year.
Is there anyone that kind of has stood out to you so far along that defensive line?
I had to start with Harper Holloman. He's a defensive end. He was the spring MVP. He was our representative at the media days. He's a returning player. He's not a transfer. So somebody that kind of knows the system. You also have Machiavelli Malatumo from Nevada who transferred in. We also play Nevada this year. They come to the Houch and play us. So maybe that's a leg up knowing some of their tendencies with the guy from Nevada, but he's a big body. We got Robbie Harrison that transferred in from Indiana. He is a space eater, man. You're going to take two guys to block him if you want to stay in front of him. Then also looking at Ryland Suafilo from Southern Utah, then Jaden Gray from Louisiana Tech. We just have a lot of guys that maybe haven't got a chance to start or be full-time starters. But we've got some big bodies, some nice size, and something I feel like we haven't had in several years is we have a ton of depth on the defensive line, because that's one of those positions where you've got to rotate bodies in and out. You're not just going to line up the same 3 and 4 guys and keep them out there for a 6, 7, 8 minute drive if you're on the field for that long. So I think the strength of this unit is going to be the depth of this unit. And, obviously, hopefully they stay healthy, but I think we've got a lot of bodies that can step up and rotate in and be impactful this year.
They brought in so many transfers on this defensive line. Is there one you think kind of has the biggest impact?
I think Machiavelli Malatumo from Nevada is probably the one that I've heard the most about from the coaching staff. Kind of the same goes with Robbie Harrison. He had previously played at Arizona State and had crossed paths with one of our other players that also came from Arizona State last year. So had some working knowledge of him before he came and was on campus. Then also have some high expectations for Vincent Sneed Jr. that also came over from Indiana. We've got just several big bodies that can plug and play day one, come in and be impactful. And one of our, kind of our weaknesses last year was our run defense. I think if we can help shore that up and be stronger in that area and get off the field more frequently on third down, it's really going to do a lot for our offense. They can't do anything standing on the sideline. And I think we've got a good collection of players that are going to just help us be better this year on that side of the ball.
Well, Moff, let's take a look at this linebacking room. And it's kind of similar to that defensive line in the sense that there's going to be looking to replace their starters in 2025. Darius Thomas is off to Oklahoma State, while the trio of Chandler Matthews, Terrence Ellis, and Devon Lynch have all graduated. This room's going to be highlighted by the return of Anthony Breckenridge, who played in 11 games last season. How did this group come together over the summer and the spring?
Yeah, it's another one of those groups where a lot of new faces, a lot of question marks. And, like we mentioned with the defensive line, we have to get better in run defense. That has to be an area that we just can't get gashed upon, every single drive. We have to know that teams like when we play Louisiana Tech, they just handed the ball off and just wore us down. This group, again, I think we added a lot of good pieces. Anthony Brackenridge being the one that kind of jumps out as a returner. Then Dominic Oliver from San Diego State, Josiah Knight coming from Mississippi State, Zach Smith from SMU, Jalen Wester from Colorado. We added several guys who they need an opportunity to get on the field and be a full-time player. And right now they're into fall camp where it's time to prove that they belong on the field and can be a full-time guy out there making plays. Plenty of depth here. We just need, 2 to 3 guys to step up and say, I'm the man. I'm going to go out there and I can get you 90 plus tackles. Because when you lose guys like Darius Thomas and Chandler Matthews, Terrence Ellis, those guys were all over the field making plays. They had a nose for the ball. They were clean in their tackling technique, and they would wrap you up and get you on the ground. We have a lot of guys that just need to step up and prove that they can be that next great linebacker.
Let's move over to this defensive backfield, and they'll return 2 guys who saw action. I'll start that over. 3, 2, 1. Let's move over to the defensive backfield, and they'll return 2 guys who saw action in at least 12 games in 2024. Cornerback Kent Robinson and safety DeMarco Williams. I feel like we sound like a broken record at this point, but we need to know, given all the losses in the secondary, what are the expectations for that group?
Much like I said about the wide receiver room on offense, that being the strongest position on that side of the ball, I think the defensive backs are clearly the best and strongest position group on the defense. You have the known guys in DeMarco Williams and Kent Robinson that are returning. That it's always nice to have guys that know the room, know what the defensive coordinators and your DB coach are expecting. But then we go in and we add guys like Braxton Myers from Southern Miss, who is going to be heavily involved in this defense. And then you got Al-Mahi Ali from Charlotte. I really expect him to be impactful. We got Jalen Lewis from Temple and Jalen Emery from Houston, Avarian Cole from App State. We've got a lot of guys that have played a lot of football. And then you mix it in with guys like Virgil Marshall and Nazir Ward that have been here and are returning. Maybe they're not getting leaned on as much to be starters, but I think there's a ton of depth in this room. And I think the 4 or 5 guys that are on the field are going to be as talented as any defensive back room in this conference. And I think that's saying a lot because Liberty has a really good defensive back room and La Tech has a really good defensive backfield. I think our starting 4 and 5 guys are going to be just as good as any other secondary in this conference.
Looking at this secondary, and let's just say, like you said, like it's strong. It's one of the best in the conference. It's dominant because who stepped up?
I think it's going to be Al-Mahi Ali, the transfer from UNC Charlotte. He's a big boy. He's got a nose for the ball. He's a hard hitter in the backfield as a safety. I think, he's kind of the cleanup crew for those cover guys on the boundary. He's watching those deep balls coming down the sideline or across the middle. We've been known for having some really impactful secondary guys over the last few years. You go back to Kendrick Simpkins before he transferred to Baylor, Upton Stout that was here the last couple of years before he went to the NFL with the 49ers in camp now. I think he can be that next great defensive back player that's playing downhill a lot with a nose for the football, either causing turnovers, fumbles, or whatever it may be. I think he's going to be that player that steps up and has the biggest impact this year.
Moff, you've got a lot of new faces in here, and you've got some vets coming back. But if you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who you got?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Harper Holloman. I think on the defensive line, we've pretty consistently have had some pretty dominant defensive ends, have had guys that can be disruptive in the backfield. And I feel like that was a missing piece last year. And Harper, I think he's a redshirt sophomore off the top of my head. He's a younger guy, but he's going to get a chance to be on the field, basically full time, coming into fall camp now and coming into the season. So I think if Harper Holloman can elevate his game to where he's now that full-time guy that's going to be on the field, we need to have someone that can get in the backfield and disrupt any quarterback dropping back to pass or the run game. But we can't let quarterbacks just drop back and have all day to pick us apart. And I think Harper Holloman is going to be a big piece of getting that done this year.
Well, we've talked some offense, we've talked defense. Now let's move over to the special teams. How are those units looking? Are there any concerns?
When you lose a field goal kicker like Lucas Canero, who was first team All Conference USA, he was a second team, or no, he was a first team postseason All American by Phil Steele last year. I think he's second team preseason All American this year in the Phil Steele magazine. When you lose that caliber of a kicker, um, it can feel like, man, that stinks. But we went out and found a kicker transferring from USF, John Cannon, who I think is going to step in and just do a good job. We typically aren't asking our kicker to be out there kicking 50 plus yarders, even though Lucas proved he could do that last year and was 6 of 6 beyond 50. That's why he was such a valued asset in the transfer portal. But I think we're going to be fine in the kicking game. And then we return punter Cole Maynard, who transferred in last year from North Carolina. He's actually the son of a former pro punter, Brad Maynard. So we have really high expectations for him coming into his senior year. He has pro aspirations. He just needs to put it together and have a good season in terms of kicking and his net average. So I think we're going to be really good. Special teams wise, that's typically one of our strongest and most consistent units. Coach Andy LaRussa does a really good job with special teams. It's one of those teams where you don't really want to focus on them, because if you're focusing on special teams, usually something bad happened. We just want those guys to go out there, do their job, kick the field goal, get a good clean punt off and get off the field, help us flip, the field position or whatever it may be. And I think we're going to be in good position with special teams this year again.
Well, that's good to hear, because I think Lucas is the only special teams player we've ever had as one of our players of the week. So look forward to seeing if we can repeat that this season.
All right. Well, now that spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into the season, Moff?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely the offensive line and the defensive line, like we talked about earlier. And in my opinion, the concern isn't the talent within those rooms or within those groups. The concern is putting those pieces together and getting the best players on the field that are going to give you a chance to win. The only concern is that there's a lot of unknown, and we don't know who those people are going to be, as of right now on August 1st. But I will continue to lean on the fact that I have a lot of faith in our staff and our position coaches to coach those guys up and put them in the best position to be successful. We have a long history of doing that, identifying talent, developing talent, and helping them be successful. So I think both of those position groups, while they are the biggest question marks, while they are the biggest concerns right now before we played a snap of football, by the time we get to week 0 and open up against Sam Houston here at home, those position battles are going to be won. And then the depth that we have behind them, that competition is just going to make everybody rise to the top and be a little bit better. We're going to be in good position with both of those groups heading into the season.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how has it changed Western Kentucky's recruiting philosophy?
We were one of the G5 teams that I felt like got ahead of the curve with as far as NIL collectives with the Red Towel Trust. We had a couple very involved fans, super fans, donors of the program that started and launched the Red Towel Trust. It has been very successful over the years of helping us retain talent. We've seen guys like Austin Reed, who entered the portal and came back a couple years ago. Upton Stout entered the portal, came back. Malachi Corley a couple years ago had blank checks from multiple schools, including SEC schools, to go play football for them. And we didn't just retain those players with money, because we don't have an unlimited tap of money to offer these players. But when you have a good relationships, you have good systems, and you have a good offense, and just win a lot of games, I think that helps sell players on coming back if you can get them to look at the bigger picture and not this one-time check that school X, Y, or Z is trying to offer you. So I think we've operated really well in the transfer portal era. We are going to lose talent, that's something that we know, but we're going to do our best to develop relationships with the players that we have here, sell them on our past success with players who, all the guys I just mentioned are in the NFL right now. We still have yet in the transfer portal era have yet to have a player transfer out of Western Kentucky, go to another school, whether that's P4 or wherever, and get drafted to the NFL. And all the guys I mentioned were drafted from Western Kentucky. So if you can play ball, you need game tape. You need to be on the field playing, showing that you can make plays, and that it doesn't matter who the competition is, the NFL will find you. And I think we've proven that we have a track record of you can do that here at Western Kentucky. And I think that helps us recruit when there's other players at programs that are underutilized. That really helps us say, hey, come here. This is what we do. We've got 15 guys in training camps right now in the NFL. Looking across the landscape at our fellow G5 schools, that's a lot to have 15 active guys in training camps. Now, will they all make rosters? Not necessarily, but if it's practice squads or if it's another pro league, they're going to get opportunities, and they did that from Western Kentucky. So we've navigated the transfer portal really well. Obviously, that's still continuing to change with revenue share, etc. But really, at the end of the day, it's a relationships-based business, and you take care of your people. They'll come back and they'll play for you.
So, Moff, you talked about their ability to retain guys, but how do you feel like the staff at Western Kentucky has been doing in navigating the portal in terms of acquiring talent?
I mean, I think they're excellent. And, that's been a staple of Coach Helton, before the portal is what it is now and collectives were a thing. He was doing this back in 2019 through 2020 before it exploded and kind of became the wild, wild west that it is today. If you go back and just comb over all of our rosters, we've always found good, whether it's skill players, offensive linemen, defensive linemen, just across the board. Coach Helton has embraced the transfer portal. He always says, this is a chance to make our team better, to go find talent out there that wants to come play for us, wants to represent their brand and put themselves in a better position. Like I said earlier, to have one good year and then possibly go pro, or if that's to a P4 school and try to put themselves in a better position for their own brand, whatever that is. Coach Helton and staff have done a really good job at always identifying talent and what we need to make our roster better. So, they do a fantastic job of acquiring talent out of the portal.
What do you think the main strength of this 2025 team will be?
I mean, it's going to be the offense. I think with Maverick McIver and coach offensive coordinator Rick Bowie coming in, it's plug and play. You're not guaranteed success. We've seen it work obviously before with Bailey Zappi and Zach Kitley coming over from Houston Baptist several years ago. But we feel really good about those guys coming in and just helping make this offense better. Rick Bowie is a young up and coming coach. I mentioned earlier that, Tyson Helton finds and identifies those guys. And he knows that if he comes in and has one fantastic year at Western Kentucky, it's going to propel him to a P4 job, really quickly. Just look at what we did with Zach Kitley, who's a coach at FAU now. Look at what it did for Ben Arbuckle, who went to Washington State and is now at Oklahoma as the offensive coordinator. But those two guys are going to help lead this offense to a place that it hasn't been in a couple of years. Last year, we kind of took a step back in our points per game. Even though we had a really solid quarterback in Caden Veltkamp, I think we're going to see a lot more growth out of that position, a lot more production, especially with all the skill players that we have and just the scheme that's going to continue to be drawn up. I think there's so much talent on that side of the ball. It's clearly going to be the offense that leads this team in 2025.
Well, you got new DCs, you got a new OC, you've got a new quarterback coming in. There's a lot of unknowns, I guess, on the defensive side of the ball in the sense of new faces and whatnot. But, Moff, what does success look like for the Hilltoppers in 2025?
We need to be playing for a conference championship. That's kind of the hump and the hurdle that we haven't gotten over yet during the Helton era. He got us to the championship game in 21. We lost to UTSA. We got there last year and we lost to Jacksonville State. I think we have the pieces and the talent on this roster and the continuity with Coach Helton that gives us a leg up compared to a lot of our conference mates. If we win less than 8 games, as I'm starting to look in and do our projections now for our own podcast, winning less than 8 games is probably going to be disappointing if it's a 7-5 type of season. The ability and the opportunity to win 10 or even 11 games is there for the taking with the way that our schedule sets up. LSU near the end of the season, that's obviously a tough game playing an SEC team on the road. But there's not any other game on this schedule that I don't look at and go, we can win that ball game. So, it's going to be a good season. And anything, in my opinion, anything less than 8 wins is a disappointment.
Well, you talked about maybe the possibility of a 7 wins as as a floor and be disappointment. And then, hey, double digits, 10, 11 wins. That's a big swing. But what part of this schedule are you looking at as being pivotal to this Hilltopper success in 2025?
Well, I think when you look at the non-conference side of things, we play another really good G5 team in Toledo. This is the second game of a home and home. We played them here in Bowling Green last year and were able to win that game. Now we go up to their place and we play them this year in week 3. That's going to be a tough game. They return, they've got a really good coach in Jason Kendall. They return a lot of good talent. So that's going to be kind of a pivotal game if you want to look at possible G5 playoff inclusion. If we can run the table short of the LSU game, we've got to win that Toledo game if we want to be in that conversation. And then short of that, the way the schedule sets up, we don't play Liberty, which is the other conference favorite kind of year in and year out. We don't play them, but we do play Jacksonville State, who won conference last year. And even though they have a coaching turnover, they have a lot of roster turnover. They still feel like they upgraded a lot across the board. If you look at their roster and their new coach and Charles Kelly over there. So, playing them the last game of the season, like we did this past year, it kind of feels fitting that if we're going to go and play in a championship game, to be the man, you got to beat the man. And that could be them standing there in front of us, playing for an opportunity to go play in that championship game. So, they're a team that I look at that we have to win that ball game. And like you said, I think double-digit wins is there for the taking. We just have to go win these games and worry about them 1 week at a time.
I got a couple questions about some teams. It's not very often that you see the first game of the season being a conference game. What are your feelings? You guys have Sam Houston week 1. Now, it doesn't really matter who the team is, but what are your thoughts of like a conference game week 1? Like first one out of the gates.
Yeah, it hasn't happened in a few years where that's happened to us, but it seems like every 4 or 5 years it seems to happen for whatever reason. It's different. There's a lot of unknowns with both of our teams. Sam Houston last year, I think, won 9 or 10 games, but they also had a coaching turnover. Coach Keeler went to Temple, so they, new coach, new roster, new system, just a lot of new, just like several of the teams in our conference, including us. But I feel really good knowing that we've got 7th-year Tyson Helton. And, even though our defensive coordinators are new, they're guys that have been in our system. Even though Rick Bowie is new, he brought in his quarterback with him. So I feel good that we're playing a conference game week 0 because I think we're going to be a little bit further ahead of the curve than Sam Houston, who by game 3, 4, 5 may be starting to put it together and figure it out. We get them right out of the gate, and we can go 1-0 in conference right out of the gate with having a little bit more familiarity with the players and the system and the expectations.
And then you got two new teams to the conference in Missouri State and Delaware that 2, 3, 4, week 5 and 6, and then you have to go to their places. So that'll be interesting and a twist to the season. But enough schedule talk. We've kind of been all over. We've talked NIL, we've talked special teams, offense, defense, coaching changes, the season. Is there anything else that you want to share or think that we need to know about this 2025 Western Kentucky Hilltopper football team?
Well, I think the way that last season ended, even though it's a large group of new players, but it's also a lot of guys that are returning, maybe guys that were depth pieces and not playing as much last year, and even the coaches returning. The way that last season ended, we kind of backpedaled into a conference championship game, and then we got our tail whipped, quite frankly, to Jacksonville State. And then we went and played James Madison in the bowl game and got our tail whipped again. I think there's a little bit of a sour taste in a lot of players' mouths and just wanting to come back and be better this year and propel this team to a championship. And even though there's a lot of new pieces, you could talk all day about, the 50 some odd new players on this roster and what is unknown. But what is known to me is that Coach Helton and his staff are consistently winners. We're going to win, 7 and 8 games is kind of his floor. Now that's what we're going to win every single year. And then when you have to do more than just look at our roster when you start deep diving into, teams and projections and how we're going to do this year. When you start looking across, not only Conference USA, but the rest of the G5, we're all fighting the same battle. We have so much turnover on our rosters. Just the transfer portal takes away so much, and then you're hoping you're backfilling with talent that's going to help you win games. I have more faith in Coach Helton and our staff to do a better job than our opponents as far as identifying talent, recruiting talent, and then developing talent. So I think we've got a lot of hungry guys on this roster who are ready to make a name for themselves, bust out, and have that one good year that's going to help propel us to hopefully a conference championship.
Well, Muff, I want to say thank you for taking some time out of your day to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it. But before we let you go, we want to give you an opportunity to share with our listeners where they can find your work and maybe some things you got coming up during the pipelines there for the Topper Talk.
Yeah, guys, I appreciate it. If anyone's listening, looking for a podcast to listen to, we're on pretty much every, audio platform. Just search for Topper Talk. You'll find us, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, whatever. We're also on YouTube. We release a video episode with every single episode. So just head over there, search for Topper Talk Podcast. We're on basically every social media platform, Twitter being our main one, where you're going to get daily updates and, news and information and stuff coming out. We're also on Instagram. We're on TikTok. We're on Threads, Facebook as well. So we try to be active on each and every single platform. One of the things that we have coming up, and we do this every summer, and we're already 95% of the way done with it, but we do a position breakdown series through the summer leading up to game 1. So we break down every single position group like we just talked about here today. We dive in, we talk about everybody that we lost, everybody that we added, who we project to be the starters, who's going to be the breakout player, MVP, bold predictions. That's always a really fun way for us as, the host and co-host, myself and Tyler, to better inform ourselves as fans of our own team, because there's so many new faces. And I think the listeners, as they listen in each week to every position, it starts to help answer some of those questions about all these new faces, helps familiarize them with some of the people we have coming in and what the expectations may be. That's always one of the funnest things I find, doing this now for several years, is really breaking down each position group. And then as we get into the football season, we do a preview of every single game, and then we do a recap of every single game. Just calling a spade. We know we have players and coaches and administration that listen to our broadcast, but we try to be fair. There's no personal attacks to players or coaches, etc. If there's a bad performance, we call it a bad performance. If it's a great performance, we call it a great performance. But we find that that's what the listeners like to hear. They just want to hear people talking about what's really going on the field. And that's just what we try to be. We try to be authentic. We try to talk about every sport, every athlete, every coach, every program here at Western Kentucky. So that's just kind of what we do and what we hang our hat on.
Stephen, thank you again. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Amazon Music, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.